in school, we watched it, and
You
it's
have
like
to have context. Yeah.
we're going to watch it because I want you to understand the first times this kind of narrative device of shooting things was used. Now we're going to talk about why it's,
the problematic parts of it.
right.
Well, I'm not someone for going back and taking guns out of police officers' hands or who shot first. I'm kind of a purist in terms of the sense of what I want to see, and then we can pontificate on what they would have liked to have happened.
Right.
When they go back and culturally what they would have changed. It would have been more relevant for Spielberg to talk about the fact that he wanted to take the guns out, he wasn't happy, and then 10 years later come back and say, actually, no, I think it's kind of more relevant to have the guns in there.
I just have a real problem when you ignore history, because there are countless times when I'm watching a movie with Abby, and if someone uses the N-word, she's like, oh my God. And I said, okay, I tell you not to, but you have to understand when this script's created, let's talk about why they used it. That's how, to me, that's how growth ensues, is when we can look at what the problem is and we can say, why? Where did this come from? What are they doing? You can look at the minstrel shows and say that, and Karina Longworth says this in her show, that those were created of the white superior attitude that they needed to repress and show the stupidity of the blacks. And we need to have that conversation where that comes from when we start looking at now that people are going to parties in blackface. Where does that originate from, and why is it a problem?
And then, blackface is a problem, especially here, but then you see people in Japan that do blackface, and over there, from their culture, it is not seen as offensive as it is over here, but we see that and go, what the hell are you doing? And they see it as, well, I'm trying to be a black person.
So I saw the Song of the South when I was a kid. I remember having a storybook of it. I remember having the sheet music to play on the piano, Song of the South. And I remember the music. I remember things about it, but the specifics I don't, because I was younger. I was a kid. I would really love to go back and be able to watch it now with the lens as an adult and see those things that we're talking about now. I mean, I would love to have that ability to go back and look at this movie that I kind of remember, remember liking. I know I had the storybook and I had the sheet music. I just want to go back and look at it again. And with the lens that I have now as an adult, I want to see what it was like. I want to see the things that were problematic. I want to see what was wrong. And I would love to have somebody step in and tell me look at this, what this was based, who created it, why it was created, what the point was.
That song I was talking about with the slaves, the former slaves on the plantation. I kind of remember that moment. I certainly had never noticed that they were freed slaves that were then saying that life was better because their white master had made them safe, yet they were still enslaved, essentially.
I mean, is that Disney is worried about the fact that what they put out is an entertainment product and not a political product? I think by Song of the South, they're afraid of it being used as no longer entertainment, as a political product.
And and I think that the funny thing is, the more they suppress it, the worse it makes it.
Oh, yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
It's the Streisand effect, where Barbara Streisand didn't want pictures of her house out on the internet that people had taken from the aerial views. And so by her trying to suppress that, all people did was put more pictures of it out there.
They wanted more and more.
With Disney saying, hey, we're not going to talk about Song of the South, all people do is say, well, when are we going to see Song of the South? And their silence on it only makes people want it more.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't I go to like Disneyland or Disney
I'm about to say, there is a ride.
There?
Splash Mountain is based off Song of the South.
And it actually has Briar Rabbit and all
those
those
Briar
things.
Rabbit, Briar Bear, and all that. And Briar Fox.
They take all those out, or are they still in
Nope.
there?
No,
that's still
those
there.
characters are still part of the ride.
You don't get Uncle Remus. You don't obviously don't get the Tar Baby, which that's problematic all of itself. Now, what I found interesting too is, as I'm digging into this, and I think it has one or two more episodes to go in her 6-part series, and I just can't get enough. I'm looking around, and sure enough, Whoopi Goldberg comes out on, which one is she on, The View or something?
Yeah.
And she had a problem, and it wasn't an anger problem. She's like, release that movie. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I agree.
It is something that when you put it away, you make now. And they talk about that a few white supremacists look at it and say, look at this. This is and they try to negate how bad it was towards blacks. Well, no. I mean, everything about it is appropriation. Everything about it is minstrel, whatever. She even gets into this podcast that she supposes, and I've actually seen some of this stuff before, that the original Mickey Mouse and Steamboat Willie was nothing more than kind of a step and fetch it blackface thing where his mouth was big and white and he wore the white gloves, which was seen as a black person trying to step up their culture.
Right.
And that eventually they fixed Mickey Mouse so he wouldn't look like that. Disney does so much now with, being equal to all people that work for them. They have gay day or whatever they call it.
We're now being somewhat progressive, where there's an element to which they've announced that one of the characters from Beauty and the Beast is actually gay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're kind of moving into this, is Elsa gay or not gay?
I haven't heard that one yet.
Where is Elsa in the spectrum?
Right.
So Disney's kind of, it's so weird to be this gigantic multi-billionaire
There's
entertainment
Funko
company.
characters based on characters from Song of the South.
Are there really?
Yes. There you go. Funko 3-pack. Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, and Brer Bear.
When did that, what? When did that come out?
I agree with you, Richard, though. They've got so many things that are forward thinking in that way now.
Release date, 2019.
The sad part is that the characters,
Mm-hmm.
the characters in Song of the South were the last black focused characters that they had until Kiss the Frog, in which they had a black princess.
Right.
So there was a gap there where they have these problems. To me, Disney needs to acknowledge their history. And Walt Disney was not so much a known racist. He was a known uber conservative who hated communism. And he even got into the blacklist type issues of things that, happened to McCarthy, all that stuff.
I'm sorry. I have to go to the bathroom.
I almost think that they need to acknowledge these things. I almost don't know where to go when Sean announces.
That's fine.
I'll cut that out somehow. But let me. I think by just ignoring their history, they create a problem with their history.
I agree. And as an adult that likes to dissect and understand media from all eras.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we've talked about this one at a time. Kelly and I are huge fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer,
Mm-hmm.
but at some point Joss Whedon became problematic in terms of how he depicts women.
Mm-hmm.
And you go back and you look at it, and while Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a feminist at the time, if you will, we've moved so much further now that it's really fascinating to go back and look at those things. We talk about Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones as a television show is interesting. You go back and read the comic book when Bendis wrote it in 2002, 2003. Right. She says words like, she says the R word, right? Do I say it? I don't say it.
Say it.
She says retard.
Okay.
In the book, demeaning somebody. And we move forward culturally 10 or 15 years and we don't use that word anymore. We don't say it.
Right.
But it's not something I want to go back and have Bendis alter.
No.
I want that snapshot of that moment and what he was thinking. We had him call in on a podcast and talk about those things
mm-hmm.
and how we've moved so much forward in what we're doing now. And it's just, we move forward, but I don't want to lose those cultural touchstones that let us know what was happening at that moment so we can learn from them and understand them.
I think that it's important when it becomes to cultural significance that we move into a new era, whether that be that, hey, we're now aware of how you treated African Americans at that time, or what we did to gays, what we did to anybody. I don't care what it is. I think it's important that we're able to go back and say, wow, but at that moment, that was considered progressive. And that we have to, because eventually we're going to look at our era now and we're going to look and go, oh my God, they did that. There will be something that we're doing right now that future generations will look back and say, you weren't this. If we aren't willing to continually see what the ladder is that gets us to the top. If we're going to ignore the rungs, I mean, God, this sounds so self-important. We're going to fall down.
We're going to repeat,
If you remove the rungs, you're going to fall back to where you were before. We have to look at it. And I found myself almost resenting Disney for not giving it to us.
I agree.
I mean, I want to go to Disney World so I can go to Star Wars Edge, Galaxy's Edge or whatever.
Right.
But at the same time, when I heard what Sean just said about that the ride still contains elements of Song of the South, I was kind of like, well, shit, am I not kind of a hypocrite? Because one of the biggest things I've taught my child from the get-go is we do not judge anybody based on anything other than how they are and the character of their world and how they treat others. I've now hypocritically looked upon what I've taught my child and said, oh, it's okay, though, that these people put this over here. So, I mean, how do I support Disney when I feel that they're making huge mistakes? Isn't that the way that usually I'm supposed to stand up to that kind of thing, is to not support it? So, There's the conundrum for me.
Yeah, I'm speechless now. Mike, I don't have to talk about that. Like, go a little further, but yeah. So
it's just an interesting thing, and I will tell everybody, if you are a film Hollywood fanatic like I am, go check out You Must Remember This. She does not release weekly. She does deep research. I mean, she'll come up with things. I'm like, seriously. In fact, this has a whole episode on Hattie McDaniel, who is famous for winning the first Oscar given to a Black American, who played Mammy in Gone with the Wind, who is also in Song of the South, who therefore could never get any more work because all Hollywood would give her were the Black Mammy roles.
Can you, it's really, really interesting to go back and listen to popular music of the time and to pull some of these classic performers forward and listen to the songs in the context of, this is a beautiful song. Those are amazing vocalists. Mm-hmm. I love what they do. And then to think about the oppression they were living under at the time to produce such beautiful works.
Right.
You talk about Hattie McDaniel, just thinking about that she had these roles. That's what she was dealt with. That's where she lived. She probably still couldn't go certain places or do certain things, but she was still a performer and somehow able to overcome and impact what we do now, particularly in music, those performers.
Well, and the funny thing is, she was a singer that they couldn't figure out what to do with her. So they put her out as a blues singer, and she developed routines where she would go and they would show Gone with the Wind and she would do some of her stuff. But in that, since Mammy was the sassy one that talked back to Scarlett O'Hara, she put more of that talking down to white people, which we became revered for. However, the NAACP eventually looked down upon her because they thought she perpetuated that role. And she's like, do you not know what I'm out here doing and what I'm saying? And she eventually all but became ostracized because they didn't think she'd done enough. And they started looking at actresses like Lena Horne and saying, wow, look at her, when she had done nothing at that point. So go listen to this podcast if you're like me. And it's fascinating when you listen to these things. Anyway, I thought an interesting conversation for the day. We'll see everybody next week.
Bye, everybody.